Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, our mission is to really get under the skin of one of the most, fascinating geopolitical stories out there.
We're talking about Singapore, often called the Little Red Dot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How does this tiny island with basically no natural resources become this absolute global economic giant? And, such a unique political entity as well.
It's a fantastic question. Because it's not just about getting rich quick. It's this incredible case study in intense strategic planning. They really turn their constraints, geography, politics, history, into advantages.
Yeah, and just to give you a sense of what we're dealing with here, let's kick off with some facts that really highlight how unusual Singapore is.
Okay.
Geographically, think about this. It's just 1 degree north of the equator. Tiny, tropical, kind of vulnerable, you'd think.
Right, but then you look at the economics, the wealth is just, staggering.
Yeah, the purchasing power parity adjusted GDP per capita. It's estimated over $156,000 for 2025.
Which puts it right near the very top globally, way ahead of many bigger countries that are packed with resources.
And in terms of stability, it's kind of rock solid in its region. Singapore is the only Asian country with that top AAA sovereign credit rating from all the big agencies.
That's a huge signal to global finance, reliability.
Exactly. But what's really interesting, I think, is the system behind that AAA rating.
You usually associate that rating with, totally free market, hands-off economies.
But Singapore, it's this hyper-capitalist engine, sure, but built on a foundation of really significant state intervention.
Which brings us to maybe the most striking contrast, the one that really sums up the Singapore model.
Good on.
It's always ranked as one of the world's most expensive cities to live in, right? Often number one.
Yeah, notoriously expensive.
Yet the homeownership rate is something like 88%. It's incredible.
How does that even work?
Well, and this is the key part. Almost 80%, 78.7% to be exact, live in public housing. Subsidized housing run by the HEB, the Housing and Development Board.
Ah, okay, so the state provides that core stability.
Precisely. Which then kind of frees people up to compete in this really intense, expensive, globalized economy. It's a trade-off, a very deliberate compromise that's central to understanding it all.
Okay, so to really grasp this modern, super pragmatic state, we need to rewind a bit. Look at its history, even the name itself, Singapore, the English name.
Yeah.
It's just an anglicized version of the Malay name, Singapura.
Right, and Singapore takes us back into ancient history, the Buddhist culture, actually. It comes from Sanskrit, Sihapura, Lion City, or Lion Fortress. The lion, I know, was a big symbol of power, protection, royalty across Southeast Asia back then.
And there's that legend, isn't there, about the naming?
Yeah, the story goes that Seng Nala Utama, a Sumatran prince or Raja from the 13th century, landed there after a storm.
Okay.
And he supposedly saw this strange, impressive animal he thought was a lion. Now, historians are pretty clear there weren't actually lions native to Singapore.
Yeah, okay. Minor detail.
Right. But whether it was zoologically accurate or not, the name Singapura, Lion City, stuck. And it really set a tone, didn't it, for how the island saw itself.
But it had names before that too, right? It wasn't unknown?
Oh, definitely. There are Javanese records from 1365 that call it Temasek. That might mean something like Sea Town.
Which makes sense, given its location.
Exactly. Reinforces that it was always about maritime trade. And the Chinese knew it too, as Puluo Zhong, which is basically their way of writing Pula Ojong.
Pulau Zhong.
Yeah, it means island at the end of a peninsula. Pretty straightforward description.
So these names all point to the same thing. It's geography. Right there at that critical choke point for trade routes between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Always important.
Always understood, yeah. But it really exploded onto the world scene in 1819. That's when Sir Stamford Raffles showed up.
Representing the British Empire.
Correct. And Raffles immediately saw the potential for an entrepot, a free port, a place where goods could be traded back and forth without heavy taxes.
And he set one up.
He did. And the change was incredibly fast, driven purely by commerce.
The population figures from that time are just wild. Before Raffles, maybe 1,000 people. Mostly local Malays.
Yeah, very small. But the free port was like a magnet. Huge numbers of migrants poured in, looking for work, mostly from southern China.
So by 1860, something like 80,000 people?
For 80,000, yeah. It completely changed the island's makeup almost overnight. Suddenly it's cosmopolitan, multicultural, but also, setting the stage for future social complexities.
And the British cemented its strategic value militarily, too, didn't they? With the naval base?
Oh, absolutely. The Singapore naval base. Finished in 1938, it was massive. Churchill called it the Gibraltar of the East.
Meant to be this symbol of untouchable British power in Asia.
Which makes what happened next even more shocking. The fall in 1942 to the Japanese.
A huge national trauma, you can imagine, the speed and scale of the defeat.
It was stunning. Around 60,000 British, Australian, and Indian troops surrendered to a smaller Japanese force. Churchill himself called it, what was it? The worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history.
Wow. So it wasn't just a military loss.
No, it shattered the myth of British imperial power. For the local population, seeing the Union Jack lowered, that was profound.
And the Japanese occupation itself.
Brutal. They renamed it Seonan II, Light of the South. But it was a dark period, especially the Sukching massacre.
What was that?
A systematic purge targeting ethnic Chinese perceived as hostile to Japan. The estimates vary widely, but thousands, possibly tens of thousands, were killed. This experience, this vulnerability, it burned itself into the collective memory. The need for self-reliance, self-defense, that came directly from this period.
So after the war, things didn't just snap back to normal.
Far from it. The recovery was tough, infrastructure destroyed, crime up, lots of labor strikes, food shortages. And Britain, having failed to defend Singapore, didn't look like the reliable protector anymore. This really fueled the drive for more autonomy for self-government.
Which eventually led to the rise of the People's Action Party, the PAP.
Right. And the PIP, led by Lee Kuan Yew, initially saw the solution to Singapore's economic problems, especially high unemployment, in merging with its neighbors.
Joining the Federation of Malaya, which became Malaysia, that was in 1963.
Yeah, the thinking was they needed access to a larger common market to survive economically.
But that didn't last long, did it?
Less than 2 years. It was a really volatile mix. Deep ideological clashes between the PAP, which was quite socialist and highly organized, and the Malay nationalist leadership in Kuala Lumpur.
Plus economic issues.
Big time. Singapore faced trade restrictions. And critically, there was serious communal tension. The race riots in 1964 were particularly bad. Very bloody.
So the whole thing just fell apart.
It became completely unworkable. The Malaysian Prime Minister at the time, Tunku Abdul Rahman, essentially decided Singapore had to go. He pushed for expulsion through the Malaysian parliament.
So Singapore didn't choose independence exactly.
No, it was kicked out. The vote in the Malaysian parliament was 126-0 for separation, August 9th, 1965.
That must have been terrifying.
Absolutely. There's famous footage of Lee Kuan Yew crying on television when announcing it. Suddenly, Singapore is on its own. Independent, yes, but tiny. No resources, no real military, no common identity yet. Survival wasn't guaranteed. It required something extraordinary.
Okay, so 1965, independence, but forced independence. No resources, no natural hinterland, surrounded by potentially difficult neighbors. How on earth did they go from that point to becoming an Asian tiger?
Well, the strategy was incredibly focused and, frankly, quite ruthless. It was all about export-oriented industrialization. Go out and aggressively court foreign investment.
Build factories, create jobs.
Exactly. And it worked spectacularly well in that first phase. They averaged something like 8% real GDP growth per year right up until the late 90s. Just phenomenal.
But they didn't just stick with that, did they? They evolved.
That's the key thing about Singapore's strategic agility. By the 1980s, the leadership realized, okay, we can't keep competing on cheap labor forever. Other countries are catching up.
So they needed to move up the value chain.
Precisely. A very deliberate pivot towards high technology, high value added industries.
Like what specifically?
Things like petrochemicals, advanced electronics, and crucially, semiconductor manufacturing, wafer fabrication. This wasn't accidental. It involved huge state investment in education and infrastructure to support these sectors.
And did that pay off?
Massively. Today, just the semiconductor industry alone makes up about 7% of Singapore's entire GDP. It's a cornerstone of their modern economy.
Wow, 7% from just semis. So beyond high-tech manufacturing, what are the other pillars?
You've got three main engines, really. Financial services, it's the 6th largest financial center in the world now. Then there's logistics, which we'll definitely get into, and oil refining and trading.
Oil refining? I didn't realize that was so big.
Oh, yeah. It's the 3rd largest oil refining and trading hub globally. Plus, they're huge in building oil rigs and ship repair. It's all about sophisticated, high-value industrial services. That's how they command premium prices.
And all this economic activity is totally intertwined with being this massive global hub, right? For traffic, for trade.
Absolutely inseparable. Let's start with air. Changing airport. It's not just an airport. It's like a whole city dedicated to aviation.
Connecting Singapore to, what, over 300 cities?
Yeah, the network is vast. And it's consistently ranked the world's best airport. It got the top spot again in 2023.
And the airline, Singapore Airlines.
Also top tier. Skytrax's world's best airline winner. It's like 12 times. It's all part of this national obsession with quality, efficiency, and connectivity.
Okay, so air travel was top-notch.
Yeah.
What about by sea? The port must be critical.
Critical is an understatement. The Port of Singapore is, well, the scale is hard to comprehend. It's the world's second busiest port overall in terms of shipping tonnage handled. Think about that volume, 626 million tons of cargo a year.
Huge numbers.
But here's the really crucial part. It's the world's busiest port for transshipment traffic.
Transshipment. What does that mean exactly?
It means most of the containers moving through Singapore aren't actually for Singapore itself. They arrive on one giant ship, get efficiently unloaded, and then loaded onto other ships heading to different ports in the region or around the world.
So Singapore acts as this massive sorting center for global trade.
Exactly. The ultimate global middleman, facilitated by incredible efficiency. And on top of that, it's also the world's largest center for bunkering ship refueling.
So basically, if you're a major ship involved in global trade, chances are you're passing through or stancing in Singapore.
Very high probability, yes.
Okay, let's talk finance then. How does that fit in?
Well, it's the third largest foreign exchange center globally. Huge amounts of currency trading happen there. And to cement its place, Singapore has been really proactive about economic integration, signed over 10 free trade agreements.
Who are its biggest partners?
China has been the largest trading partner since 2013, which really shows its ability to balance East and West.
Now, this financial success, it leads to the tax haven label that often gets thrown around. Is that fair?
Well, it's complicated. The personal income tax rates are relatively low, yes. But the big draw for the super rich is often the exemption on foreign-sourced capital gains. If you make money outside Singapore, you generally don't pay Singaporean tax on it.
Which attracts wealthy individuals.
Definitely. Like Eduardo Saverin, the Facebook co-founder, famously moved there and renounced his U.S. citizenship. The Tax Justice Network did rank it fourth on their financial secrecy index back in 2015, highlighting that role in holding offshore wealth.
But they're not on official blacklists anymore.
No, they were taken off the OECD's gray list back in 2009. But, the reputation as a safe, discreet place for global capital, that persists.
Okay, one really unique thing you mentioned is how they manage their economy. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, the MAS, they don't really use interest rates like the Fed or the Bank of England.
That's right. It's quite unusual for a major economy. Instead of adjusting interest rates up or down to control inflation or stimulate growth, the MAS focuses almost entirely on managing the exchange rate of the Singapore dollar, the SGD.
How do they do that?
They basically allow the SGD to trade within a secret, undisclosed band against a basket of currencies, the currencies of their main trading partners. They intervene in the market to keep it within that band.
Why that approach? Why not interest rates?
Because Singapore is a small, incredibly open economy. It imports almost everything it needs, food, energy, raw materials, and it exports high-value goods and services.
Right.
So managing the exchange rate is the most direct lever they have to control inflation coming from imports, while also keeping their exports competitive. If the SGD gets too strong, imports are cheap, but exports suffer. Too weak, exports boom, but import costs and therefore inflation soar.
So it's about finding that sweet spot within the band.
Exactly. It's a highly tailored monetary policy for a very specific kind of economy, very pragmatic.
That kind of precise, almost surgical control we see in the economy. It definitely seems mirrored in the political system, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. On paper, Singapore is a unitary parliamentary republic. It's based on the British Westminster system, parliament, prime minister, cabinet.
But the reality on the ground is different.
It's dominated by one party, the People's Action Party, the PAP.
Yeah.
And they've been in power continuously since 1959, even before full independence.
Long time.
It's an incredibly long time, which is why you often hear political scientists describe Singapore as an illiberal democracy or maybe a soft authoritarian state. The structures of democracy are there, but the system is heavily managed to ensure stability and pay dominance.
What's the justification for that, from the PAP's perspective?
Often it's framed around Asian values, the idea that community harmony, social order, and collective well-being should take precedence over the kind of radical individualism sometimes seen in the West. They argue that strong, stable governance was essential for Singapore's survival and progress, especially in the early days.
It's like they took the old British colonial structures, which were pretty authoritarian, and just repurposed them.
In a way, yes, they adapted them for nation building, focusing on efficiency, anti-corruption, and long-term planning. But control is definitely woven into the system. Look at the electoral setup.
The GRCs, group representation constituencies.
Exactly. These are large electoral districts where political parties have to field a team of candidates, usually 4 or 5. And crucially, at least one member of that team must be from a designated minority community, Malay, Indian, or other.
The stated aim is to ensure minorities are always represented in Parliament.
That's the official rationale, and it does achieve that. But critics argue the GRC system makes it much harder for opposition parties.
Why?
Because instead of needing just one strong candidate for a single seat, an opposition party needs to find and fund a whole team of credible candidates to contest a GRC. Plus, the way the boundaries are drawn can sometimes lump opposition strongholds together with PAP strongholds, diluting their vote. It raises the bar for challenging the PAP significantly.
So elections happen, they're clean, but the structure favors the incumbent.
That's a fair summary. Even in 2011, when the PIP got only 60% of the vote, which was seen as a big swing against them, they still won almost all the seats because of how the system works.
Okay, then there's the elected presidency. That's another unusual feature, isn't it?
Yeah. Very much so. It's not just a ceremonial head of state. The president has real power, specifically custodial powers over the country's past financial reserves and key public service appointments. They can veto government spending plans if they draw on past reserves.
A check on the government's power, then.
In theory.
Yeah.
But the eligibility criteria to even run for president are incredibly strict.
Like what?
You need to be at least 45. You need to have held a very senior public office, like a cabinet minister, speaker of parliament, chief justice OR, and this is the key one for private sector candidates. You must have been the chief executive of a company with at least $500 million in shareholders' equity, and it must have been profitable during your tenure.
$500 million. That rules out pretty much everyone, surely.
It rules out almost anyone not already part of the established state or corporate elite. It ensures the president comes from a very specific, experienced, and arguably like-minded pool of people.
And there's another layer, too, the reserved election.
Right. This is quite controversial. The Constitution says that if no one from a particular racial community, Malay, Chinese, Indian, other, has held the presidency in the last 5 terms, the next election must be reserved exclusively for candidates from that community.
And that actually happened recently.
Yes, in 2017. The election was reserved for Malay candidates. Only one person, Halimah Yacob, who had been Speaker of Parliament, met the stringent eligibility criteria. So she was declared president without an election taking place.
Which, again, highlights how managed the political process can be.
Exactly. It ensures representation, but critics argue it limits democratic choice.
So this focus on order and control, how does it play out in international rankings?
It's a real paradox. The World Justice Project's Rule of Law Index ranks Singapore incredibly high on things like order and security, number 3 globally, and absence of corruption, also number 3, world class in those aspects.
Wow.
But on fundamental rights, it ranks much lower, 38th in that same index. There's a clear trade-off being made.
Prioritizing stability and economic well-being over certain individual liberties.
That seems to be the operating philosophy, yes, and you see it very clearly in the legal system.
Which is known for being strict.
Very strict, and quite conservative on many social issues. They retain corporal punishment, caning, for certain offenses, and they retain and actively use capital punishment, usually hanging.
Particularly for drug trafficking, right? That gets a lot of international attention.
It does. Groups like Amnesty International strongly condemn it. But the Singapore government's position is unwavering. They argue it's a necessary deterrent, citing what they call clear evidence. It saves lives by preventing widespread drug abuse. They seem to have absolutely no doubts, as they've said, about its effectiveness for their society.
What about freedoms like speech and assembly?
Also tightly regulated. Reporters Without Borders ranked Singapore 129th out of 180 in their 2023 Press Freedom Index. Public gatherings generally need police permits, and protests are usually restricted to a designated area called Speaker's Corner.
But the system isn't totally rigid, is it? There has been some social change.
That's true. A major example was in 2023 when the government repealed Section 377A of the Penal Code.
That was the law criminalizing sex between men, wasn't it? A colonial-era law.
Correct. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong presented the repeal as a kind of pragmatic compromise. Society was changing, attitudes were shifting, especially among younger Singaporeans. Keeping the law was becoming increasingly divisive.
That they didn't legalize same-sex marriage at the same time.
No, crucially, they simultaneously moved to amend the Constitution to protect the existing definition of marriage between a man and a woman from legal challenges. So decriminalization, yes, but maintaining the traditional definition of marriage, it shows that balancing act again.
Okay, let's shift to defense. Given its size and location, national security must be paramount.
Absolutely. It's taken incredibly seriously. They spend about 2.7% of GDP on the military, which is quite high. And the Singapore Armed Forces, the SAF, is widely seen as the most technologically advanced military in Southeast Asia. It's viewed as the ultimate guarantor of their independence.
And there's an interesting historical connection here, isn't there, with Israel?
Yes, a really fascinating and crucial piece of their early history. When Singapore was suddenly independent in '65, it had no army to speak of. It needed to build one fast, surrounded by larger neighbors.
So they turned to Israel.
They did. Israel, facing its own existential threats, understood Singapore's situation. They provided military advisors, helped set up the structure, including the system of mandatory national service, conscription, and reserve duty, which is still the backbone of the SAF today.
And they maintained that relationship even though Singapore's neighbors, Malaysia and Indonesia, didn't recognize Israel.
Yes, it was pure pragmatism. Survival came first. National interest trumped regional political sensitivities.
And in that pragmatic, somewhat neutral stance plays out in their diplomacy, too.
Definitely. Singapore positions itself carefully. It's a regular participant in G20 meetings, even though it's not formally a member, and it leverages its reputation for neutrality and efficiency to host major international events.
Like the Trump-Kim summit in 2018.
Exactly. Or the historic meeting between the leaders of China and Taiwan back in 2015. Being seen as a trusted, neutral venue is a key part of their foreign policy. They make themselves indispensable. Okay, so if you really want to see the Singapore model in action, look at how they deal with their fundamental geographic limits. Being a tiny island city-state means every single square kilometer matters.
And one way they've dealt with that is just making more land, right? Land reclamation.
It's incredible when you think about it. Through decades of reclamation projects, they've actually increased Singapore's total land area by about 22%.
22%, wow.
Yeah, it grew from about 580 square kilometers at independence to over 710 square kilometers by 2015. They've even merged separate smaller islands together, like creating Jurong Island for industry.
But that must have consequences. Where does all the sand come from?
Exactly. That became a huge issue. Their massive demand for sand led to neighbors like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam getting worried about the environmental impact and restricting or banning sand exports to Singapore. There were even reports about sand wars.
So what did Singapore do? They couldn't just stop needing land.
They had to pivot their engineering strategy. They started moving towards using polders, which is the Dutch method.
Polders, how does that work?
You build a dike around a section of the seabed, pump all the water out, and then you let the exposed land consolidate and settle over time. It's much more complex and expensive than just dumping sand, but it dramatically reduces the need for imported fill material.
Ingenious, but necessary.
Absolutely. But here's the other side of that coin. Even with this intense pressure for space, for housing, for industry, they've deliberately maintained a focus on green space.
The Garden City idea.
That's right. Started way back in 1967 by Lee Kuan Yew. The policy mandates setting aside significant land, about 10% currently, for parks, nature reserves, and greenery.
To counterbalance the density.
Precisely. It's about quality of life. The Singapore Botanic Gardens, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is probably the most famous example. It's this very conscious effort to avoid becoming just a concrete jungle.
Okay, so land is scarce, but maybe even more critical is water.
Water is treated as a fundamental national security issue in Singapore. Historically, they were very dependent on agreements to buy water from Malaysia. That's a vulnerability they've worked incredibly hard to overcome.
Through the 4 national taps strategy.
That's the framework, yes. Tap 1 is imported water, mainly from Johor in Malaysia, under agreements that are decades old. Tap 2 is using local catchments, basically collecting rainwater from about 2/3 of the island's surface area and storing it in reservoirs.
Okay, 2 taps down.
Tap 3 is reclaimed water, which they brand as in-water. This is highly purified wastewater treated using advanced membrane technologies.
Is that safe to drink?
It meets WHO drinking water standards, absolutely. It's rigorously tested. A lot of it is used for industrial purposes, requiring high-purity water, but some is also blended into the reservoir supply for drinking. It's a huge part of their water story.
And the 4th tap?
Desalination, turning seawater into fresh water. They have several desalination plants now. It's energy-intensive, but essential for security.
So the goal is complete water independence eventually.
The target is self-sufficiency by 2061. That's when the main water agreement with Malaysia expires. The projections are that by 2060, Newater will meet 50% of demand and desalination will meet 30%.
That's a massive shift. Must have cost a fortune.
Billions. Around is $10 billion just for recent upgrades to the water treatment infrastructure. But like defense, securing water is seen as non-negotiable.
Okay, let's talk about moving people around this small, dense island. Transportation must be a nightmare to manage.
They realized very early on, back in the 70s, that if everyone owned a car, the island would just grind to a halt. Total gridlock.
So they tackled it head-on with the ERP system.
Yeah, electronic road pricing. It actually evolved from the world's first urban congestion pricing scheme, which they started way back in 1975 with paper licenses. The ERP gantries that automatically charge you when you drive into congested areas during peak hours came later.
To discourage driving at busy times.
Exactly. Make people think about the cost of using that road space. They're actually upgrading it now to a satellite-based system, supposed to be more precise.
Is that running smoothly?
Well, it was meant to launch in 2020, but it's been delayed, apparently until 2026. And interestingly, one of the main reasons cited is the global semiconductor shortage.
Even Singapore, a semiconductor hub, gets hit by the chip shortage for its own infrastructure.
Shows how interconnected everything is. But the ERP is only part of the story for managing traffic. The really big lever is making cars incredibly expensive to own.
Right, the COE, Certificate of Entitlement.
Yes. Before you can even buy a car, you have to bid for a COE and a quota system. These certificates are limited in number and only last for 10 years.
And they're expensive.
Extremely expensive. The price fluctuates with demand, but it can easily add tens of thousands of dollars to the cost of a car. And that's on top of very high registration fees, the ARF, additional registration fee, and excise duties.
So what's the end result? Owning a car is just prohibitively expensive for most people.
For the vast majority, yes. It makes Singapore arguably the most expensive place on the planet to own a car. A basic family car can cost 2 or 3 times what it would in Europe or the US.
Which forces people onto public transport.
Which is exactly the point. It pushes demand towards their very efficient mass rapid transit, MRT, subway system, and bus network. It's all about managing that scarce road space.
So we've talked about the economy, the politics, the resource management. But Singapore's success also hinges on managing its people, right?
Yeah.
Keeping social harmony in such a dense, diverse place.
Absolutely crucial. And they approach this with that same kind of deliberate structure. Look at language, for instance.
4 official languages.
Right. English, Malay, Mandarin Chinese, and Tamil, recognizing the main ethnic groups. But English is specifically designated as the common language, the lingua franca.
For practical reasons.
Yeah.
Government, business, schools.
Exactly. Ensures everyone can communicate, and it plugs Singapore directly into the global economy. But this creates a bit of tension.
With Singlish.
Yeah. The government actively discourages Singlish, that unique, very vibrant local Creole, mixing English with words and grammar from the other languages. The official line is that it hinders proficiency in standard global English.
But people still speak it.
Oh, absolutely. For many Singaporeans, Singlish is a core part of their identity, is how they talk to each other informally. It's a real cultural marker. So you have this ongoing push-pull between the state wanting standardization and the people having their own distinctive way of speaking.
And that multiculturalism extends deeply into religion, too, doesn't it?
Massively. Singapore is often cited as the world's most religiously diverse nation. A Pew Research study from 2014 highlighted this. There's no single majority religion.
What are the main groups?
Buddhism has the largest share, around 31%. But then you have a large group, 20%, identifying with no religion. Christianity is next at about 19%, and significant populations of Muslims and Hindus as well.
So tolerance isn't just a nice idea, it's essential for peace.
It's a non-negotiable necessity. The government actively promotes racial and religious harmony and comes down hard on anything seen as inciting hatred. They can't afford not to.
Where does this cultural fusion really come alive? Maybe the food?
Oh, definitely the food. Singaporean cuisine is famous for its hybridity. Peranakan or Nyonya cuisine is a classic example, blending Chinese ingredients and cooking styles with Malay spices and flavors. Delicious.
And the hawker centers. You can't talk about Singapore food without mentioning them.
Absolutely iconic. These are basically large, open-air food courts. The government set them up originally to get street food vendors off the streets and into more hygienic, organized spaces.
And they're still central to daily life.
Totally. People from all walks of life eat there. And they are meticulously graded for hygiene by the National Environment Agency. A, B, C, D ratings displayed prominently. Food safety is serious business.
It's like the ultimate blend of grassroots, food culture, and state oversight.
Perfectly put. And the quality can be amazing. Some hawker stalls have even earned Michelin stars or big gourmands. There's that famous stall selling soya sauce, chicken rice, or noodles.
We're like $2 Singapore.
Yeah.
The world's cheapest Michelin meal.
That's the one. Though the universally agreed upon national dish is probably Hainanese chicken rice. Simple, but perfect when done well.
Okay, one last area before we wrap up. Sports. For such a small country, they seem to punch above their weight sometimes.
They do. It reflects that same national drive for excellence you see elsewhere. Regionally, in the Southeast Asian Games, they often dominate in swimming, for example.
But they've had global successes, too.
Yeah, some really standout moments. Joseph Schooling winning Olympic gold in swimming in 2016, beating Michael Phelps in the 100-meter butterfly. That was a huge deal nationally.
A massive moment of pride.
Definitely. And just recently, in 2024, Max Mader won bronze in sailing, becoming the country's youngest ever Olympic medalist at 17. These wins matter. They build national identity.
Any other notable ones?
Well, maybe not as universally known, but in table tennis, the women's team did something incredible in 2010. They beat China to win the World Team Table Tennis Championships.
Beating China in table tennis. That's like the ultimate challenge.
Exactly. China had won it for something like 19 years straight. So yeah, these sporting achievements, while maybe unexpected for a small nation, fit that pattern of strategic investment and aiming high. Hashtag outro.
So we've taken our deep dive into this little red dot.
Yeah.
And what really emerges, I think, is this core identity built on just relentlessly managing constraints.
Yeah, turning limitations into strengths almost.
Right. Land scarcity, engineer new land, water scarcity, master water technology, economic vulnerability, become hyper-connected globally, potential social friction, manage diversity tightly to ensure stability. It's a fascinating mix, isn't it? Almost contradictory in places. You've got state intervention that feels almost socialist, like the public housing.
Alongside this incredibly competitive free market capitalism.
Governed by a system that looks democratic on the surface but has these strong authoritarian characteristics. It's pragmatic above all else, highly successful, undeniably unique.
So as we finish up, here's something to think about, a final provocative thought for you. The Singapore model, for all its success, faces real challenges now. The birth rate, the total fertility rate, is incredibly low, around 1.1.
Which means they rely heavily on immigration, on foreign talent, to keep the economy growing.
Exactly. And that creates a tension. How does this system, which has always prioritized stability through strong central control, balance that with the need for perhaps more openness, more freedom, more dynamic innovation to attract and keep the global talent it needs?
Can it maintain that tight social and political order while fostering the kind of environment top global talent increasingly expects? And looking outwards, how much of Singapore's success story, the planning, the pragmatism, maybe even the control, can other small resource-poor nations realistically copy? What parts are truly replicable?
Lots to ponder there.
Indeed. Well, thank you for joining us for the Deep Dive. We hope you found that journey into the Singapore model insightful. We'll see you next time.